But I think the big thing is understanding self and understand what you're bringing to the table, because people see you as you are, but you might not be seeing you as you are.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Untapped Potential podcast with today's guest, Callum Walsh. Before we start today's conversation, I want to draw your attention to the Practitioner Needs Analysis Coaching Program. The conversations and my research have shown clearly that 160 highly successful practitioners supporting some of the world's greatest athletes have on one level achieved a great deal within high performance sports and academia. Yet on a much more personal level, many are quietly suffering to maintain the perception of being successful and happy. And this is the inconvenient truth sitting just under the surface within our high performance environments. The cost of this ranges from divorce, absent parent, physical and mental illness, all of which contribute to limiting performance impact we all strive so hard to achieve. The human element has been forgotten, with many top practitioners now finding ways to leave our beloved industry. My research process has spawned the services I now provide to support performance practitioners. Athletes have a vast array of options within a support network to help thrive, optimize, and activate their full potential. But very little is currently aimed at offering this unique support for performance practitioners. This is where the Practitioner Needs Analysis Coaching Program fills that gap. It allows you to identify what qualities are most important for you to show up in your role, your career, and life in your fullest expression. It provides an inner analysis that highlights the components of your life, giving you clarity on what is blocking you, how it's blocking you, and what you need to do to release those blocks. This guides you to tailor your goals and actions away from potential burnout, divorce, or illness, and instead towards one where you thrive as a practitioner and in your personal life. To find out more about the group and one-to-one options Men Behind Sport offers, visit www.menbehindsport.com or email me at richard@menbehindsport.com. I'm really excited to have this conversation and to share this with you. Callum is a hugely experienced practitioner who has over 15 years of experience in elite performance management. He's worked in several leagues and competitions across different cultures and continents, including the Premier League, European Championship 2016, Championship, League Two, Turkish Super Lig, and the Brazilian Serie A. He's also collaborated with various coaches and stakeholders at multiple levels, from international, senior, and junior teams to world-leading performance institutes such as EXOS and Aspire Academy. His mission is to apply his scientific knowledge, practical skills, and cultural awareness to help athletes and teams of staff achieve their full potential. And this is why I wanted Callum to be on the Untapped Potential podcast. His voice in this space of helping coaches and practitioners is greatly needed. And I'm super excited to share this with you, particularly around his own personal struggles, the solutions that he has found useful, and his doctorate research. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do enjoy it, please review it, put feedback on iTunes or Spotify, and your action by doing that is actively going to help more and more practitioners find this content. So without delaying any further, here is the episode with Callum Walsh. Welcome to this episode. So Callum Walsh is on today, and you're the first person I've interviewed. I'm so grateful for you to come on and to share your wisdom across both personal, professional, and also your doctorate.
No, thank you very much for having me, and honoured to be the first.
First of many, hopefully. First of many.
Hopefully.
As you know, like we touched on it a minute ago, like this podcast is really about the practitioner. So, and the non-technical elements. There's so many great podcasts out there. Look at the technical and the application of the technical. But I'm interested in one, your journey and the struggles you've encountered and the solutions that you've found to that, as also, I'd love to dive into your doctorate a bit as well. And so the first question I'd love to ask you, like, just to get some clarity, for the listener, and like, what were your inner drivers that led you into a career in sport?
I think a real love for football. Obviously not being good enough. I started coaching when I was like 14, 15, which seems kind of really young, but one of my coaches had kind of seen something in me and asked me to help out. So I was like going after school and helping him as coaching. So I got the kind of buzz for coaching. I'd always loved football. And then I kind of fell into the fitness space. I became a personal trainer straight out of college. And then my mind started to wonder, right, well, I've got this love for football and I'm quite enjoying this avenue of fitness and everything in it. How can I kind of put these two together? And it kind of just meshed in from from there really. So my kind of driver was just probably because I was never good enough,
Mm.
was to maybe see if I could help someone who might be struggling or might not be deemed good enough to make it because they're not a good athlete.
Right.
And we see that all the time in terms of, oh, athletically can't get around the pitch, or he's always injured, or he just can't get over that hamstring, or he's got this or that. And it was almost a kind of driver to try and be like, well, hopefully I can help one person
Right.
kind of get over that hump or break that cycle. And that was
Mhm.
kind of my drive that really got me into it, I think.
Okay. I mean, that's, like the research that I've been doing, like that's such a very common reason why many of us turn into practitioners. A failed athlete, many people call it, and not being good enough. One of the effects of that, I suppose, that I've heard about anyway, and this has affected me deeply. Like, for me personally, I had a very low self-worth, not that manifested in sport, but that was within me in all areas of my life. That element of not being good enough, has that ever affected you in your career as a coach? That idea of that imposter syndrome, I suppose you could call it, or one way of calling it.
Honestly, probably not really.
Mhm.
And I was probably more impacted because I wasn't particularly good at school.
Right.
I didn't find out I was kind of dyslexic till I was sort of 16, 17.
Right.
I had some really, really phenomenal teachers, and I had a couple of teachers that were really quite scathing of me in terms of,
Yeah.
not being smart, not being this, not being that. So that probably impacted me more than not being a good enough athlete. I think I kind of knew that I was okay with not being a good athlete because I was just crippled by anxiety when I was playing. So
Right.
I loved everything about it. I loved training. I loved the preparation for the game. And it was just the game just filled me full of fear.
Hmm.
So I never kind of missed it. I didn't ever think, oh, I wish that was whatever. I was really quite comfortable coming out of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was probably more that kind of bit of a battle, maybe against some teachers maybe at school or one particular one at college that really were kind of quite scathing on my ability to get my A levels or to ever he won't ever get his A levels, let alone go to university. And it's more kind of that I probably then anchored in and really started digging in to kind of prove somebody wrong, if that makes
Right.
sense. So then I kind of got into that fact of, I would never say I'm a particularly smart academic person, but probably the one thing I've got is I've got an ability to hyper focus on an area. So, if we're gonna, I don't know, let's talk about whatever. If I don't know about it, I will then just go down a rabbit hole and delve deeper and deeper into it until I find out everything about it,
Hmm.
and then come up to kind of my own summary of that, and then
That's
how I'm going to, and then how I'm going to apply it into my practice. So that's always kind of been more my driver. Whereas maybe I think some other people would pass over that conversation. Those are the conversations that fill me with anxiety and panic, and then I have to go away and control that by going down the rabbit holes.
right. I mean, really, like, thanks for, it's so refreshing to hear, like you're doing a doctorate right now and the highest level of academia you could get to, and yet you talked about, how you progress through your challenges with dyslexia. How, in fact, my understanding, I saw an amazing TED talk a few years ago on
Mhm.
dyslexic brain, and like how amazing it is, how problem solving, and it kind of a very, I'll send it to you after, and I'll put it at the bottom
Oh
of this
yeah, no,
podcast if
fantastic.
anyone's interested. Um, Talk about that, like that anxiety. One of the many things that the coaches of over 160 have said about is that stuck in the head anxiety around can't be present. So whether that is always thinking about next stage of the season, next stage of Olympic cycle, CPD, career progression, also, and for me personally, especially when I worked at the EIS, I found it very hard to share my coaching philosophy. So as a team, S&C team would sit down regularly and discuss coaching philosophy or things we're working on, that kind of stuff. I literally, I crumbled inside of me and like sweating at this physiological reaction to stress in this environment. And so that limited me massively in the sense of how I could share my thinkings. Like, I believe it limited me in how the level of coach I could have become versus where I was in the sense of my application of knowledge. And it just, I think, yeah, like how has that ever affected you within the teams that you've either been part of or you've led, of coaches, I mean, practitioners?
Me personally, I probably don't think so. I
Hmm.
think probably because I don't ever deem myself as particularly academic. If I'm ever
Right.
presenting stuff, I would present to a department almost the same way I'll present to a manager or a player in terms of, hey, this is what I'm doing. So I'm very visual. So
Right. Right.
I mean, one of the guys I work with who's doing the prof doc with me, Paul Bauer, who's great, he just laughs at some of my slides because if you've seen some of my slides, I mean, even when I go back to them, I'm like, I can't even remember what I was talking about because it's just a picture or it's an analogy that will sum up what I want to talk about because I'm so visual, and then that helps me frame it.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's great for the listener, but I just kind of think those kind of bits help me sow the seed with someone, so someone will
Right.
remember that part about. I mean, in my next professional doctorate, presentation, we're doing about framing and liminality, and one of my small videos that I'm putting in the presentation is about Donald Trump. And if you kind of see it, it doesn't really make sense. But when I explain it,
Hmm.
it will kind of all flow. So that's never kind of hindered me. I think
Hmm.
I've always felt very comfortable standing in front of people.
Right.
I think I had a. I'm trying to think. I think it was about my second year at university. I come from a background where my dad was an entertainer, so
Okay.
I was
Right.
always around a lot of entertainers from being a really young kid. So comedians, singers, magicians. So I was probably quite well developed to stand up and do impressions or do jokes from
Right.
3, 4, 5 years old in front of you know people that were on TV in the 80s and 90s, and so I never really had any inhibition. And I remember being in my second year, it was our first presentation, and I seen people with cue cards that were just trembling and shaking.
Right.
I thought, what's that about? How can you do that? But equally, those are the people that were really good at written essays, and I was terrible at written essays.
Right. Right.
And I thought, well, do you know what? I find it quite easy to present. So why don't I put as much effort into presenting as I do in my essays that I really struggle with?
Mm.
So I started really delving into, again, going down rabbit holes of, right, TED Talks on PowerPoint presentations, visuals for PowerPoint presentation. How do I do this? What's the best way to frame it? How do I do that? And just going down to try and really, what color should the background of my presentation be? How long should the presentation be? To just go, right, well, if I'm going to present to a group of staff or on my uni course or a group of players, I want that to be really impactful. So again, that probably links into those things before where I just go down a rabbit hole of probably maybe a little bit of insecurity of like, crap, like this needs to be good. So let me do it to the best of my ability.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's what sounds like to me anyway. You're using that, or you said insecurity or the anxiety, but you're using it in a fuel for positive, a fuel for action, rather than it's not. It's for me in my past anyway. It was froze. I froze and limited me because I couldn't take a step forward or the steps forward that I wanted to. Rather, that's what it sounds like. You've got this. You use it as a fuel. You see it as a.
Yeah, I don't think I'm very good when I'm too relaxed,
Mhm.
which is probably not good. I tend to think I'm best when I'm probably quite anxious because then I'm constantly trying to think of things, making sure A, B, and C is done. When I'm relaxed, I don't remember anything. My attention to detail is terrible. So I actually try and I think because I get so anxious about so many things, my only way to deal with that is control. So how do I
Right.
control it? And it's also maybe not a good trait, and it causes me maybe problems when I'm interacting with maybe managers or whatever. Because my only way to control my anxiety is to just gain extra knowledge about it.
Mhm.
That doesn't always help the situation
Mm.
because then you're just wanting to blurt out all your extra knowledge, and sometimes
Okay.
that's not not what's required. If we're having a discussion and we're opposite the table, if I just keep on hitting you over the head with more and more research, you're just gonna no.
Mm.
It's actually gonna put up your guard. So
Right.
that's the journey I'm on now as well, is to learn. I've got this almost trait to when I'm out of control and highly anxious, just to learn everything I can because then that shows that I know what I'm talking about. So then I can put an anchor in the ground,
Right.
and that's great. But that's not always what's needed in a high performance environment within interactions.
Yeah. Um, I can imagine as well, like, you know, that must come up when, say, you have a conversation with the manager, or there's some incident that happens right now. How do you have any practices? In my case, I regularly practice breath work and certain practices like that to, it's not, I don't feel stress. I do feel stress. I do feel anxiety. But for where I've got to now is I'm able to regulate in the moment. So I'm aware of what's going on with me rather than, and that's taken a while to get to, by the way. But do you have any other practices other than knowledge, upskilling, controlling what you can control? Is there anything else that you have right now that you use?
No, and that's probably something I need to get really much better at, because I'm probably quite quick to react.
Okay.
And that's not always, but now I think as I've got older and I've got more experience, I start to look at things empathetically,
Yeah.
whoever that is, whether that's a practitioner, whether that's a director of football, a CEO, a manager, and start to think, right, well, why are they saying that? What's led them to this point? And I've touched a little bit until you understand. And one of the things that kind of really hit me over the head was the term, my supervisor used, Bob Muir, and it's, all behavior has meaning and is understandable in context. And it's like, if I got brought into a failing football club and the club's going to lose 200 million if it gets relegated, and I'm the savior of that club, I haven't really got time to work with someone to gain trust, because if I lose the first 3 games, it's a whole different story. And then people are starting to question me. So having that empathy for people, I think more is probably my only development in that area, where instead of just reacting from I see A, so A is what I'm going to react to, is see A and go, right, well, what's the story behind that and how have they come to be that way, and all those sorts of things, and understanding that context, I think, then relaxes me a little bit more.
Right. That's so powerful. And I think that gets lost a lot. I think us as humans, right, we're always thinking about our story rather than what could else be going on, and a prompt I always ask myself is, what am I pretending not to know in this situation? Like an
Hmm.
example would be, I don't know, someone cuts you up in the driving. So easy to jump on that action of, oh, how rude, dangerous, whatever, all the swear words you can use to a person. The other reality could be they could be heading to hospital as fast as they can. They could have just been fired. They could, like, there's so many other stories that we don't know
Hmm.
until what you just said, it sounds like you seek to understand that person, or like you said, empathize on what that person is. If you do have, I think that has such value in in how we feel personally, but also resolution and for a positive, certainly what I
I,
think.
and I think what's quite interesting is the environment, because I'm the first one that probably, when, for example, all the toilet rolls were getting hoovered up in lockdown, the context is, well, someone's stealing, well, not stealing, just hoovering them up and being selfish. There's nothing that made people buying 3 or 4 because their parents are sick and they can't get out. Maybe it's
Mm,
someone going to a home. Maybe the person is hoovering up and selling for a profit, but do you know what? Maybe that person has lost their job and they've got to pay a mortgage.
right.
So I'm really good at that. But probably what I wasn't good at, probably up until 2 or 3 years ago, was doing that within my work environment.
Okay.
And the reason that is probably because you're under threat the whole time.
Right. Right.
So I think it's much easier to do that when you're not under threat and in your own safe personal environment, than to do it in a high stress, high
Mhm,
threat situation. I think
mhm,
it's very difficult to think that way when fingers are pointing and daggers are out,
mm.
should we say?
For sure, and that in a short while, I wanted to bring that out. Like, certainly, what you talk about around psychological safety for coaches and practitioners to be able to do their best work. I think before we dive into that, I would love to, like, when we first spoke, I think it was last year now, wasn't it? Yeah, oh, no,
Hmm.
or earlier this year, whatever. I'd love to, like, what has been your lowest point in your career so far? And one story that you shared with me was around, I think you moved, you had a house somewhere up north, and you moved down south for a job. I don't know if this is it, but you got,
Yeah.
you know, that idea. I don't want to feed you, but yeah, what has been your lowest career point so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's not been boring, you know. I mean, you're close with the story. I was based in Cardiff, and I was going out with my wife, who was then my girlfriend, and I moved up to the northwest, and I was there a couple of months, and then she left a very good job to move up, and she moved in on the Thursday, and we lost the game on the Friday, and the club cleaned house on the Monday. Um, that was quite low, um, because obviously the implications it had on everyone. My wife had left, or my girlfriend at the time, so my wife had left a job, left a career,
Right.
all those things to come up and be with me. We got, it was our first apartment that we were going to be living together, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, all those sorts of things. Where's the next job coming from? Um, but probably more so the situation with Newcastle, in terms of leaving a really stable job, um, taking not taking a risk, but going to a, a big role, a big opportunity, something that you kind of worked for your whole career, 10, 12, 15 years, to get to what you deem the pinnacle, head of sports science at a massive Premier League club, and then for it to kind of fall through for circumstances, and not for doing a bad job. I think I would have been okay if, you know, if you do something and you fail it, be it an exam, a driving test, whatever, you can kind of hold your hands up, go, yeah, do you know what? Just wasn't good enough. Didn't, work hard, I'll be better, whatever. But this was just a purely circumstantial thing. And I think that was really kind of quite tough to take, because I
Right.
kind of felt, when you're younger and you've not got a mortgage or all those sorts of things, there's different elements to it. And I think because it had been the pinnacle that I'd worked for so long, when
Yeah.
it happened previously, it was just kind of not another job. It was a good job, but it wasn't the one I'd always kind of aimed and strived to be at.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was probably my lowest ebb, in terms of it just not the living daylights out of me. It's and how do you react to that? Um I think I went quite white, because it wasn't. I thought it might happen, and then it kind of seemed like, oh no, it's gone a bit quiet, because there was almost like a 10-day transition. So I kind of thought, oh okay, well, we're over the threat of it, and then, you know listen, have you got a minute? And then your whole world gets turned
Mm.
completely upside down, and that's quite a big thing. I think also the fact that certain people who had made decisions weren't kind of in that meeting
Right.
to speak about the whys or whatever. It kind of felt quite difficult to deal with, because there was no arguing, there was no ability to, not argue, but discuss or whatever. It was like, the people that were in the room, it wasn't really their decision. They were kind of
Right.
carrying out things, and then you kind of like, what? And there's no one to kind of fight your case or discuss
Yeah.
anything with. So it kind of feels a bit, and it's almost, the only way I could kind of describe it, it's almost a bit like going home and your wife's left you, but not told you she's left you. She's just left. So, and you don't know kind of why or what. At least you want to have
Mm.
a bit of an argument, or
Mm.
like, oh no, I'll change, whatever you want to say, or no, what can we do to
Right.
whatever, but
Mhm.
to work. And it was just, and I think that was probably the hardest part, to gain closure on that, because there was just no specific answers.
Right. How long did it take you to? I mean, were there solutions? How long did it take you to get to move past that emotionally?
Uh, Honestly, 18, 19 months.
And that, I mean, that's a long time. How did that affect you, in the sense of like, on one, did you get a job? How long did it take to get a job? To like, because what it sounds like, that's not necessarily happened to me in that way at all. What it sounds like the idea of trust. Then, when you do get any opportunity, how do you trust that won't happen again? And then how do you trust the team that you step into, if that is the case? Like, well, there's some of the things you have to work through.
Um, I think it's really difficult because it was the people I trusted at the club. It was taken out of their control, and they were
Right.
fantastic. And I still speak with them to this day, and they were really good with me. And it was nothing. I don't want to say it was nothing personal, but I think the fact you then go into a space where probably the first few days is almost a bit exciting because you're thinking, well, hey, what's around the corner? And then you get these kind of ups and downs of excitement. You get a phone call, that would be really exciting, and then maybe something doesn't happen, and that's once or twice or three times, and it becomes a bit of a cycle. And then I think it was 7-8 months before I started working again properly. There was some
Right.
there's some consultancy pretty quickly in between that was kind of 2 or 3 days a week, but nothing sort of full time. But yeah, I think it just kind of leaves a bit of a taste because just it has such an impact
Mm.
on what's happening, your emotional state, because there's good days, there's bad days, there's
Mm.
days where you're kind of frustrated, there's days that you're fine, there's periods that you're absolutely no problem at all, and then there might just be one small little thing that's a bit of a trigger,
Mhm.
and it can just kind of send you into a spiral. And I think it's quite easy to spiral
Oh, big time.
into into a bad frame of mind because something happened, and you just link everything together. And what you kind of find out is elite sport, nothing is really interlinked. There's
Mm.
just a complete mess of an industry in terms of recruitment, self-preservation, all these things, that connections, networks, wheels within wheels. And it can work one way, it can work another. Sometimes it can work both ways. Sometimes it works well both ways. Sometimes it works badly because it's both ways. And it's almost just you're trying to hop on the carousel,
Mm.
and and you can repeatedly miss that carousel, that one pole. You might grab one and you might slip off, um, and you start to link all those feelings to, yeah, but if that hadn't happened, and that hadn't happened, and that hadn't happened, and that's not a really healthy space to be in,
Right. Yeah.
because what happened at Newcastle. That really had no. It probably impacted me directly in interactions within the industry, probably for a month or two, and then probably 3 or 4 months after it, not so much.
Mhm.
Um, but what you do is you just interlink, right? Well, I didn't get that because of that, and that because of that, and it's just
Yeah.
not the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, it,
so yeah,
mm.
no, so yeah, that's me.
No, thank you. Sorry, the delay. Yeah. That which puts me kind of onto the idea. My related to me, like very different circumstances, but well, the idea of self growth, and from all the interviews that I've done from my own personal journey, my idea of personal growth or self growth, what you want to call it, or personal development, was through the technical lens of CPD. So I was always trying to upskill myself on the technical requirements of a strength and conditioning coach, never from me as a person. Now, not to dismiss CPD technical, it's really
Mm.
important, but it left this massive blind spot for me, and certainly that's what I'm hearing about very often within the research that I've done, but also the coaches I work with. And a paper came out recently. Dave Hamilton was one of the authors around, the title was Clarifying High Performance and the Role, Responsibilities and Requisite Attributes of the High Performance Director in American Professional Sport. And the idea that to what supports a high performance environment, one element of that is opportunities of self-growth. And so I want to kind of get some clarity on that, because from certainly how I see it, self-growth is so much more than technical CPD. And I'd love to, from the conversation we had away from this, last year, and then before we start recording today, you sound really self-aware. Like you've got your. I know you touched on where you were to where you are now, and I suppose my question to you is: one, what is self-growth to you? And two, how much time or how do you devote focus to that, to you as a person, as well as your technical elements?
So I think self growth is just always like a constant curiosity. And I
Right.
think I listened to a podcast, and this might sound a bit abstract, but it was Jimmy Carr talking about anxiety.
Okay.
And it kind of made me realize I'm a highly anxious person, but the flip side of that is generally being highly creative. So it's pretty much the same skill in terms of, you know, if you're highly creative, there's probably a chance you're probably quite highly anxious because you've got an overactive mind. Now, I don't know the science behind it, but it did kind of make a lot of sense to me because I've just got curiosity to unravel and think about things, and I'm constantly overthinking every single situation, which isn't necessarily a good trait, but it also allows me to reflect on every interaction I have, or how I did things, and what would I do differently next time. And I think something that I've kind of really started to piece together, probably in this journey from starting my prof doc, is almost like a bit of a journal. And I don't mean in terms of what happened each day, but when certain triggers or certain things happen, things might trigger me in a negative way or in a positive way. How do I feel about that? And then kind of noting them down and blurbing them out, because I think one of the things that, and it's human nature, is when people are telling you a problem is to want to kind of solve it, and yeah, but do this, and yeah, but better things will be around the corner. Or other people will be the opposite, and everything's really good, and they'll just be telling you how great you are, and people don't ever kind of really let you sit with your thoughts
Hmm.
because they constantly interrupt, and it's human nature because everyone wants to make everyone feel better, particularly when it's negative. Um, and I think kind of blurbing these out, and I've been sharing them with my supervisors and that kind of thing, and it's just been really kind of cathartic to kind of go, right, this is exactly how I'm feeling, and I think you can be more open than, because if I'm kind of blurbing it out, whether it be notepad or on the laptop and whatever, there's no one getting in, there's no one kind of judging you, because when you're talking to someone, even their facial expressions or their body language can impact how ready you are to open up to them, or how raw you can be with them, or that fear of judgment of, can I really say that? Because, and it could be your best mate, it could be your wife, it could be your husband, whatever, that, I don't really want to tell them X, because they'll give me a shake and be like, listen, we've been through that. And yeah, because they've probably been through it with you 6 or 7 times. It's human nature to be like, get over it. But I think when you're kind of blurbing it, you can get real detail, and then it might just be empty, and it might have no movement on it, or you might just end up having just a little, it might end up framing your thoughts, how you leave that piece. So, I've done a few recently, and you kind of leave it, and then where you've left it kind of sets another train of thought in your head. Well, why am I thinking like that? How have I come to that point? Why does that? And then maybe 2 or 3 days later, you almost answer your own
Mm-hmm.
your own blurb,
Mm-hmm.
because you kind of started to frame it without any interference, because you just kind of sit in that space.
Yeah, yeah, that's really. I really love kind of how you describe that. That kind of reminds me again of a very different situation, but like the idea of grief, of going through grief, and my experiences back then within my friends at that time. This is not a fault to them, by the way, but I think, like you said, people aren't. I think people don't like to see other people in pain or discomfort, and so there's always this solution, this rescuer kind of position people come into, rather than just allowing someone to be and be in what they need to be and allow it to pass. I think there's a difference. I think we can hang. There is a, like, we don't want to keep staying in a space, and we need to recognize it and honor it as well. And I think, you said about how people, it's just non-verbal. I kind of what I remember you just saying a minute ago, and my understanding of that, it's blown my mind since I've kind of really begun to practice that, is the idea of coherence. So heart-brain coherence. And so when we feel emotions of anger, frustration, anxiety, we're in our heart wave and brain waves are incoherent. When we feel emotions of gratitude or appreciation or love, for example, our heart and what brainwaves sync up. So that's a state known as heart-brain coherence. Amazing research in this space. And then that, like, for example, the Assay Business School, a few years ago, they did research on, they're looking at predictors of leadership. So look at QEEG and heart rate variability. They assigned these different tasks. I think around 150 students were involved in this longitudinal study where, okay, if we measured physiological markers, can we predict leadership? So where they actually turn out, can we predict that in the future? Turns out that the leaders, the students who turned into leaders in the assessments, not only did they regulate themselves, brought themselves into heart-brain coherence, they influenced their team. So become like this resonant tuning fork, all unspoken, all unverbal. Yet the strong leaders became this kind of resonant tuning fork for the team around them. And so their solutions to the problems that were better. The team entered into a flow state. And just to me, that stood out like, wow, like how I hold myself within myself. And linking back to me when I was anxious, I couldn't see it. But like you think you're hiding it, but you're not. You're just resonating this feeling. And so that's why I always bring myself back to kind of what's going on within me, like the interoceptive level, like sensing what's within me. And it just made me think of that, like what you just said.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a really kind of interesting area, and I think, like you say, getting away from just and again, it's not downgrade the X's and O's, because
No.
if you don't know the X's and O's, listen, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's also other levels and depth to being a practitioner or a leader, because ultimately, whether you're working in elite sport, in military, in whatever it is, you're working with people. You know, that's a be all and end all, you know.
Absolutely. Before we dive into like some of like specifics around your doctorate, because it's a fascinating area, I want to ask you like a couple of questions. What's your measure of success? And so the reason we could preempt that, many, and I was like this, and I think you described it a short while ago, focus on the role. I want the role and to work with a championship winning team or medal winning athlete, whatever it is. But your example is such a wonderful highlight of, well, that hadn't, you were let go of that environment. Nothing to do with you. And so if you're like, what is your measure of success now, in the sense of, yes, there's external measures, success of a team, rehab, whatever it is, but what's your internal gauge now of success, so that if something like that happens again, you've got a barometer to measure, okay, no, this happened, however.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I think probably the two kind of measures of success that I would kind of always say is, did I leave the department in a better place than I found it? And also, what relationships do I leave there with? So, you know, am I still in contact with people from Cardiff 10, 12, 14 years ago? Am I still in contact with a couple of people from Wigan or Aspire or EXOS or Huddersfield or Newcastle? Yeah, I am. And sometimes those people will reach out to me, and I've had people reach out to me like, hey, you know, what do you think about this? Or, you know, I'm debating going for this job. Do you think this is the right one for me? Or whatever it is, or this is a space I find myself in. I'm a bit frustrated. Those sorts of things for me are massive. Of course, you want to reach the highest pinnacle level. What that role is, I'm at a complete crossroads. I really don't know. Would I want to be at a big club where I was a number 2 or a number 3 or a number 4? Is it good to say that you've experienced certain things or whatever? Absolutely. You know, you're not going to turn those jobs down. Do I probably want more say, because then, you know, I don't want to say you control the program, but have more impact? I think I'd probably lean more towards that way. I think at the minute, you know, obviously, you know, if the phone rings tomorrow, it might be a completely different story. So, yeah, it's just a tough one, because you don't really know where your path's going to lead you. So it's really hard to judge what you're going to deem success is. And my wife kind of has a bit of a go at me. And I had this discussion with a very close friend, and we're very similar kind of personalities. And he's far more successful than I am. But it's this: when will you be content?
Right.
And I think that's a really good question because, again, when we talk about anxiety and creativity, it's the same thing. And it's like, well, to be content will be really, really good, but probably not being content is maybe why I've still had a career after 15 years, or reach maybe some of the things I've done in 15 years, be it work for EXOS, work in the Premier League, work at a major championship. Maybe the fact that I was never content drove me to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where that sits.
Right.
You know, there's probably a really, really thin line where you want to be driven and develop, but can be really content at the same time without it hindering your
Yes.
development,
Yeah.
but still being happy and appreciating what you've got. I don't know where that balance is. Some people, I've got friends that are, when I say just driven beyond belief, I mean they're scary, scary individuals, probably to a level that I wouldn't sacrifice certain things that they have.
Right.
And then there's other people that they probably look at me in that way,
Mm-hmm.
because if it's a 1 to 10, I might be a 7, I might be an 8. Some of those extreme people might be a 10. So people at 5 might look at me as a 7. They might look at me as an 8.
Yeah.
But equally, the people at 10 might look at me as a whatever. So I think that's a really hard line, and I think you can only judge what success is in terms of a role. I think is really hard because you don't know where your career is going to take you. I think you can only judge success after you've left that role,
Right.
and I think that is by maybe the impact you had on the people you work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably be more the staff than the players.
Yeah. Right. Great. Great. And I think what stands out to me, just the idea of beginning to ponder that, contemplate that is important because, like you said, everyone has got a different measure of that. And I think that's something why I really encourage people to reflect on, because if we're just measuring on championships or level of team or level of position, like it's quite arbitrary. It's not to say it's not a measure and one to hold on to, but I also think like everyone's got a different barometer of that. And I think what sits underneath that question, which related to what we're talking about, and you touched on it a short ago, what is your measure of sacrifice that you're prepared to do? And how long do you define how you're willing to do that? And I suppose it sounds like you've got a really good relationship with your wife.
I mean, ask her about that. I think I have dragged her from pillar to post all over the world. So I think I'm very lucky. She's very, very supportive in that way. We do have a bit of a discussion around what I'm very driven, and as soon as I achieve one thing, I'm just on to the next thing. And she's like, "Well, when are you actually just going to sit back and be happy?"
Right.
And I think it's really important. We're very, very polar opposite people, and I think it's quite important to have that sounding board.
Yeah.
Because probably, if I look at my parents, my dad's more extreme to me. Right? What's next? What's next? What's next? And that's great in a lot of ways. And then, sometimes it's sometimes you need to look back and think, well, I've done some really cool stuff. Like I had a phone call from a friend, and I made a bit of a comment to him, and he's like, Cal, like some of the stuff you've done in terms of, Brazil, EXOS, Aspire, major championships, there's people that work their whole life and they've never done that. And yet I'm still not really happy with my career.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it depends what frame you look at it from. Do I look at myself compared to person A or person C?
Mm.
I don't know. So maybe that changes as you get older. I don't know. There's certain things now that I wouldn't sacrifice that I probably would have sacrificed maybe 6, 7 years ago.
Right.
And I think that's a personal choice.
Yeah.
And again, that's not good or bad for everyone. I just think everyone has their balance, and I think that probably comes from potential experiences that they've had that may be negative, so it makes them protect themselves a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the ones that it's the chicken or the egg, right? Because maybe the ones that are so driven, like to the extreme level, maybe they're that way. Maybe they've got to the top because they are that driven, or maybe they've stayed driven because they've never really had that major setback.
Mm-hmm.
That dream role like snatched away from them when they didn't want it, or just called in. I had 2 or 3 friends that were just end of season, had really good season, called into the office. Right, see you later.
Mm,
Sorry, what? How is that a
mm,
thing? So how can you expect someone to really sacrifice everything they've got when
yeah,
they ultimately know, why should I sacrifice my kid's birthday party?
right,
Because when push comes to shove, they won't care. I'm
right.
not saying all clubs won't care, but I think you just always probably err on the side of caution because, I look at things that maybe I sacrifice too for, staying late till 7, 8 o'clock and blah, blah.
Mm,
Result, think what I was trying to avoid happened anyway. So,
mhm,
and again, then it comes down to that self judgment. Are you happy making those sacrifices and the result being what it is in the end, where someone comes in or 3 games or 5 games in a row happen and you just get part of collateral damage and you're happy with going, do you know what, I sacrificed all that to be the best I can be? Some
mm,
people are okay with that.
mhm,
Others then look back at that in a real resentment way, and that's understandable as well. So you can't judge how each person is feeling within that, because maybe the person that stayed late to drive on that got sacked, maybe their family is okay with that. Maybe everything, they've got a support network around them, whatever. Maybe the person that resents it is because maybe them staying late caused issues with child support or their marriage, or
yeah,
maybe they had a sick parent or whatever it was. So then you're going to resent it more than if you've not had any of those things go on. So it's a really kind of personal
mm,
situation. So again, you can't really judge someone feeling one way or the other with it.
mhm. For
Again,
sure.
coming back to context.
Definitely, definitely. I think you've got to like, illness of a family, like kids. Certainly that's like my daughter and my wife. I'm a completely different person to who I was before I met my wife, and have been a father. And they are massive barometers for me of like, well, how's my relationship with them? That's how I gauge my success, and also the sacrifices that I'm. Of course, the elements of that within life. And one story reminds me of a coach from the research dedicate himself to this club for 15 years, kind of was sacrificed, very, almost bought into did buy into the idea of first in, last out. How many days can I be on the run? Like loyalty, loyalty. He found out he was going to get fired 3 months before he actually did by someone else, and he actually knew who was taking over his job. And like, just that's quite an extreme example, but that's also an example of someone who put all in, and then was inspired a question like, did I sacrifice kids for this? Like his marriage ended, like just 2 years afterwards, just this real dark place. And I think sacrifice and loyalty, they're some of the things that I, again, encourage people to really reflect on, like, what is my gauge of loyalty? And like you said, clubs will, and it's not necessarily personal. I agree with you on that. But that's at the end of the day, it's transactional. We are, will a club stand by us? And if we can't take off a day off because someone's ill, if we can't take a day off, oh, actually, I need to leave early to pick up my kids, like, then for me now where I stand, I question that environment. I think that also ties into budget. The top Premier League club's going to have much more staff than a League 2, sorry. And so, yeah, there's like you said, context. I'd love to dive into kind of a last bit, like some of your doctorate, and to really get some takeaways of like what you
Mhm.
see, you feel, how the areas that you think sport can make some changes, sporting environments, I suppose, related to football. But there are 3 points that kind of stood out to me recently, just from looking at your stuff, and also a really great perspective on leadership. One, well, the idea of threat, you mentioned it today, and like the psychological safety. And this first point, like you've highlighted, like the limits of high performance structure, and there are 3 elements that I remember sort of reading about. One, staffing structure, so manager versus the club. Is high performance allowed? Are the roles or goals and expectations clearly defined? Second part to that is recruitment process, so clarity, role again, insecurity versus self preservation, something you've just touched on a short while ago. Is the head of department recruiting people that potentially won't challenge them? And then the third point, staff environment. So again, clarity on the role, KPIs, staff autonomy, high challenge with high support for the staff. And so I want to kind of add to that and touch on that, how you see it.
So I think what I've kind of seen a real mix of it is, first of all, is the starting situation. And if we get, when I'm saying that high performance practitioners can't be truly high performance, people think maybe I might be having a go at head coaches because of the way they come in. I'm actually advocating that we stop sacking as many coaches as we do. So, I'm trying to. People are maybe sometimes perceiving it in the wrong way. So it's, for me, it starts with the club structure, and I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but too often what happens is it becomes mixed, because we all know that, for example, when a manager gets sacked, assistant first team coach, there you go, and the new one comes in. The problem, particularly with more the fitness or the performance side of things, is we sit in this grey zone. So analysts will generally stay, physios generally stay, coaches, they're following the manager. The fitness coach, flick of a coin.
Hmm.
So, does the manager have someone? Does he not? And I've been in processes where I've had friends that are managers and they've got quite a large group of staff, and the club that's trying to recruit them says, no, you can bring one in. We've got our club staffing structure. We've got our goalkeeper coach, our assistant manager, our first team coach, are this. That's fine. But then don't go and try and recruit a manager that wants 6 or 7 staffing, because it's going to be a disaster. So for me, you've either got to be really clear. We either have a club structure, which means we have stability through the system. Both have pros and both have cons. There's no right or wrong there. We have stability through the system. We get all our processes, all our structures, everything is lined, and we can keep moving forward. And the head coach comes in with 1, maybe 2 coaches, and that's what we're set up to do. What that then does is that limits how many coaches you can recruit, because more coaches than not want more staff. Mm-hmm. Because it becomes that trust element, because they might get 6 games, 8 games, so they've not got time to build trust. They want people on the grass that understand them. They've not got to fight battles. They can just go in and wallop. They're there and they can impact harder than if it was maybe 1 or 2 of you. Now, what happens is this transition where clubs are trying to protect themselves, because there's been some examples where managers have come in with 6, 7, 8, 9 people, and they've either left or been sacked or whatever, and then the club is gutted, and the club think, no, we've got no staff. So what happens is they start thinking, well, we can't let this happen again. So then they start to build a club staff, which is fine. But then what happens is then you get this element with this kind of 50-50 where, okay, well, now you've recruited a first team club coach and a goalkeeping coach and a fitness coach because you want to protect the club, which is what the club is right to do. But then you get this pendulum that goes the opposite side, where the new managers come in, the one guy that you want that's going to save your season because you're struggling, to go, yeah, no, but I want my goalkeeping coach. I want my foot. So then you kind of got to sack them.
Right.
So then it costs you money. It impacts the feeling of threat amongst all the staff. And then what happens is then he brings in more staff, and then it's just this cycle continues. Yeah. So for me, I think clubs just have to go, we're either going to be a club staff that has its pros, it has its cons, or we're going to be a clear manager staff. And for example, we're not going to hire a goalkeeping coach. So if you, Rich, as a manager, if you don't have a goalkeeping coach, you bring one with you. We're not going to provide you with one, because when you go, we don't have a head of sports science or whatever it is. So you bring him with you. Mm-hmm. And then again, because what you've now got is you've then got a system where you might have a manager's head of fitness, but you might have a club's head of performance. So who's having the say there? Hmm. So it becomes a bit of a power struggle and all those things. So there almost needs to be a clarity of, okay, well, if it is a staff structure, how does it exactly work? If it is a manager structure, and for example, you want a head of performance that aligns the performance department, but you allow a manager's fitness coach or a head of sports science or whatever you want to call it, what is he? Be really clear of those roles in terms of what is he in charge of? So he's in charge of everything on the pitch. He's allowed to do this. Is he allowed to change the supplement supplier? Is he allowed to change the GPS provider? Is he allowed to think about the software? All those things that you might be as a club going, well, we've just renewed that contract a year ago. Now you want to change it, and it flips and flops and flips and flops, and you end up costing yourself a fortune because you're buying yourself out or paying things off because there's no longitudinal alignment. So now that might be one way, and the other way might just be like, no, the head of fitness can just do exactly what he wants, but then you've got to factor in the fact that maybe it costs you a little bit more money, or maybe when the next guy comes in, it's completely going to change. I heard I don't know how true this is. I basically heard a story about Chelsea that they almost had a few years ago 5 or 6 different lots of gym equipment, and it was kind of set up between like, this manager's going to be, a Spanish manager, it's all flywheel, or this guy's going to be this, so it's going to be more traditional. So they could just basically wheel the stuff in and wheel it back out depending on who the manager was. And what I'm saying is, the worst part you can do is sit in the middle of those two.
Yeah, right.
And unfortunately, that's what a lot of clubs end up doing, because they want to protect themselves, but then when things hit the fan, they panic, and the manager needs all the power he can get, and rightfully so, because he's the one that stood in the dugout. So that's in terms of the staffing structure. Then you've got a recruitment process that you either might have someone from HR that doesn't know. Okay, they can ask HR questions, but do they know the difference between a good or bad S&C coach, a good or bad physio? Probably not. You've then got who judges their capability as a practitioner.
Yeah, right.
Because you might have, let's say, a head of performance that might be from a fitness background. Well, how would I judge the real nuance? Okay, I know a fair bit about physiotherapy, but not as much as a physiotherapist. So I'm going to be not as good at recruiting a physio as I would be maybe a fitness coach. And and vice versa, if the head of performance is from a medical background, then you've got a level of, if I'm a performance coach, because there's so much threat, and it's not the way I would personally work, but we can't deny it happens, that people look at certain people and go, well, he's probably quite experienced with this role. Why would he want the role? Is he coming here to take my job?
Right.
Is he going to be
back to that self-preservation? Yeah.
And that happens where, there's been lots of things where I've known people in the industry that I've known that are 10, 12 years experience apply for jobs at big clubs that might be assistant roles, but they're brilliant practitioners and they don't even get shortlisted. I know other people that are 1 or 2 years out of university that have brilliant potential that then get shortlisted and hired. It doesn't mean that I'm not against that model. I'm just saying there is an element of why do we want to hire maybe more experienced people as assistants? So there's always that kind of, as a club, do they necessarily get the best, let's say, number 2 physio? Do they necessarily get the best number 2 fitness coach? I don't know. It depends what you term as best. They might say, yeah, but we can mold this guy, which is great. But then you might have someone that's got 10, 12 years skin in the game that's brings brilliant experience with them. Which is better? Who knows? I've got my perception of what I think is better, but doesn't mean it is. And then in terms of the staff environment, is giving people autonomy over certain parts of the program and just letting them run with it, but equally provide them support, but have a clear guideline as to when the needle needs to move. So in terms of, this is what we're going to roll out. I want it ready by this date. And I'm going to check in with you every 14 to 30 days. How's it going? Is everything going okay? I'm here to support you. So I think they also need an end point to put pressure on it, because I think a lot of the times in professional sport, what we do is we give projects and there's no end date, and they just pit into non-existence. Whereas I think when you put end dates on it, I think you allow the needle to start moving consistently, maybe not quickly, but consistently. I think if the needle moves consistently over 45 weeks, it's quite a big swing, as opposed to just trying to do one mammoth swing in a row.
Yeah. So interesting that those 3 lenses, and again, just in the research, like so many of the frustrations, it's not that, like, the people I've spoken to, many enjoy their jobs, but the frustrations come from lack of autonomy, lack of clarity around role, lack of clarity around have they even done a good job or not. and there's no support. And what I mean by that, there's no coach facing or practitioner facing support. It's all the support for the athletes, rightfully so, of course, but there's no, it's that self-preservation that I hear about so much, and completely understand why that's the case, which leads me into, the idea of leadership. What is leadership? And I've been, in the last 8 years, since grief put me on this journey, I'm fascinated about reading about indigenous cultures from around the world, and particularly many myths. And one stands out with regards to leadership, kind of the models of Maori leadership. And I've kind of learned about this initially from Owen Eastwood and his personal spiritual connection to the Maori tradition. That's New Zealand, kind of indigenous culture down there. And so there are two ways of looking at leadership. There's the hero model of leadership, or there's the guardian model of leadership. And so the hero model is very much around that idea of savior. I'm here to save the club. You're lucky I'm here. You follow me and we'll be successful. Kind of the idea that that rescuer mentality. I'm here to save you, which keeps people disempowered. Versus the guardian model of leadership. And I really love this idea because it's connecting whoever's there with a sense of, one, they are not there, they're sitting back and allowing the environment, they're creating the environment for it to thrive. So they're trusting, there's trust. People feel belonging to this bigger thing because they're connected to the club or organization's values. They're connected to the community. They're connected to the history that predates them and will post-date them when they leave their role. And so as well, they understand kind of what they're inheriting and what needs mending within that, and they step in. But also it empowers those that come afterwards, rather than kind of what you described, like this constant turnover of managers. It's like, in all these different gyms, for example, it's just like, right, new manager in, clear up the mess, rather than it's a bigger picture. They're part of the journey. I think what stands out to me, I don't follow football too much anymore, but Ferguson days, like how long he was in his role, and this culture, these values, this heritage that was built from Busby and him. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but like it's this bigger thing. It's bigger than the manager. It's bigger than the players. It's the club and the values. And I wonder, which I guess ties into the third point, the 2 points. The idea of opportunity to develop. And I know you've posted this, and I find it fascinating as well. Like the reason why the All Blacks, New Zealand rugby team, have been and are so successful, because they don't just fire people. They use it as opportunities to develop. Like, because how can you get a clear understanding of what's not working if you're constantly changing all the variables? Kind of just to stay with it and trust the process. And yeah, I wonder what stands out to you about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part is you use the word trust to start with. So I think if I start with that and then go to the staff development part, if I forget, remind me. So I think when these managers come in, why are they going to trust anybody? It takes time to trust someone, and on average they're 16 months. So they can't sit back, they can't do A, B, and C, and that all comes from because a club will have a vision, but clubs panic on the vision if the vision's not working. But visions take a long time. I mean, the EPPP that was put in by the FA 12 years ago was absolutely lambasted 3 or 4 years. Oh, it's this, it's that, it's that. And then you start looking 8, 9 years down the line, how many England youth teams are winning World Cups and the players we're producing. And now the senior team is getting to finals. And you've got players like Saka and Bellingham and Foden, all these amazing players that it was designed for. And I think the thing is, it's like, if you work for a Brighton, a Brentford, you know what the model is. If you want to just work somewhere that you're going to win every week and you're going to keep hold of your superstar players, don't go to Brentford, don't go to Brighton, because you're going to be part of a journey where you're going to be like, hey, do you know what? We're going to get the next one, and we're going to be part of that journey. And that excites me, being the part of the journey of Matoma or Caicedo, because we took him as a young lad from Ecuador or Japan or whatever, and he's really raw, and we developed him, and now look, he's gone to Man City and he's one of the best players in the world, or Chelsea. That's really exciting to some people. Other people just want to win every weekend. So I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but if the club doesn't have a vision that it sticks to for a long period of time, it's then really hard to align its group of staff. And how do you judge the manager? How do you judge the staff? How do you judge everything that's going on if the alignment after 5, 6, 7, 8 games gets thrown out the window because you've lost? And I understand why it gets thrown out, because it's so financially catastrophic if that vision doesn't work after 10 games and it's going to cost you 400 million of your own personal wealth, I think I would have thrown it out. I'd probably throw it out if we drew 0-0 one game. So I'm not saying that I'm holier than thou, but from an organisational point of view, I think this way elite sport can look at these things where it be companies that take certain things to market as a new vision, be it Apple or a car company or whatever, that they go, well, this is kind of a bit revolutionary. It didn't really work the first 6 months, didn't really work the first year. We took a major hit on it. I think there was a few things with Apple and the Mac and all those sorts of things. But you know what? We persisted with it. And now look, 5 years later, we're 10 times ahead of where we were because we took 1 year of failure. But that's quite hard to do in the short term because it costs you money. So I think you get that constant issue with alignment that then puts pressure on the manager, and that's why he doesn't trust. And then the environment becomes one of threat, and two, one where every day becomes about survival. So if every day becomes about survival and what I call putting the show on, and that is speaking with the manager, discussing what's going on in training, reviewing training, blah, blah, blah. By the time everything's kind of settled, it's 4:30, and you're thinking, do I really have that one-to-one with one of the lads in the department? Now, it's something I literally go out of my way to do, whether that be on a day off or whatever, and it might just be a coffee in wherever. It might be something outside of the work environment, but I'm really quite big on that because I think it's really important. Doesn't mean I'm right. It really doesn't mean I'm right, but that's something that I think is really important to have a touch base every 4 to 6 weeks with people. And I do that through almost a written diary.
Right.
Of just a couple of key bullet points, and they can fill in how they want. And then a couple of weeks later, then we kind of catch up on that in terms of that might be, what did you want to achieve in the past kind of 4 or 5 weeks? Have you achieved it? Why not? Do you know what? Mrs. just had a kid, so things have got no worries. Like, understandable. Is everything okay? Do you need any help? It gives you that touch point. So it's like, but that's a lot of effort. And then you go to the point of, is it worth doing that effort if it means not picking your own kid up from school or missing a whatever? So are you then prioritizing some of your staff's development above maybe your family's development? Because maybe the only time you can do a meeting is a Wednesday, and do you know what? You left Monday morning, the house at 6:30 a.m. and because you had an away game Tuesday, you're back at 3 o'clock in the morning. Then you're in for recovery, thinking, well, I'm not seeing anyone for 2.5 days. Do you know what? I'll do it next week. And do you ever get around to doing it? It's really tough because, again, you've then got to make that decision. Am I okay making that sacrifice to be home an hour later to have that hour conversation with someone in my department? And that's got to come from self.
Yes.
And I'm not saying anything is right or wrong in that. It's just how you perceive that.
I completely hear you and agree. And I think this is why I think, and of course, it's going to be down to budget for certain organizations, but I think that's why there has to be almost like a performance lifestyle coach, or there's coach for coaches within a department, just for coach facing. And of course, that's going to cost extra money. I'm aware of that. But I think to have that support network, that's almost the glue that like you said, you've got your job, and then over that, you've got to then reach out to your, people within the team, which I think is really important. And do you miss picking your child up, or do you, to do that? And I think that's why I think coming back to coaches need coaches. I think we need some form of support network within each environment, just as solely coach facing. And I think that brings me to try and kind of wrap this up. What do you think are you touched on earlier, empathy. That's one thing that you've worked on, to try and understand someone else's point of view. Would you add to that with regards to what non-technical skills do you think is important for practitioners to begin to look at themselves in?
I think empathy is a big one. How you deal with conflict.
Right.
Because there's going to be a lot of conflict, whether that be two staff arguing over a rehab plan for a hamstring injury, whether that's a player that's been dropped and you've got to run him after the game and he's raging, whether that be the manager disagreeing with what you've proposed. So there's going to be conflict in how you do that. But I think the big thing is understanding self and understand what you're bringing to the table, because people see you as you are, but you might not be seeing you as you are, if that makes any sense. So you might be bringing something to the table and thinking you're bringing something, but maybe you're giving something else off. Maybe you're coming across slightly differently. Maybe how you're treating that person is a little bit more transactionally than you would if it was someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you're a club member of staff, you might treat the manager a bit more transactionally, going, hey, well, we've had 5 managers. Let's take a club in, a Watford who are famous for sacking managers. Are you really going to invest your time, really honing with the manager? Listen, I'll probably never get a job at Watford after this, but no, because you probably think, well, he's probably going to be, we're going to have 4 this year, and it just becomes draining to invest all that energy in it. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it becomes transactional. But how you approach those situations can then become more difficult in your day-to-day life. So
Mm-hmm.
if you understand that you're coming at it more transactionally and you're aware of self, you can then go, well, actually, okay, I know he might be going, but how can I frame these conversations to make not my life easier, but less conflict, because I am treating it transactionally, so that's spiking him a little bit, so it's causing conflict. So,
Right.
if you come at it and you're aware of how you're approaching those situations and why you're approaching those situations in that way because of your past and your frames and your contexts,
Right.
and that might be self-preservation, it might be threat, it might be all those things. If you can understand all those things about yourself and what you're bringing to every conversation, I think it helps you deal with those conversations, those conflicts better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think I completely agree. And I think, it's one thing for us as individuals to be self-aware, but what the exciting part, how I see, is if our department, if each of us are self-aware, that's where some magic can happen, because we're all aware of this stuff, rather than if we're just aware on our own and no one else is doing this work. Yes, we can operate within that realm better, but we're still limited. Whereas if everyone is look at non-technical elements, such as brilliant ones that you highlighted, I think that's where, and certainly what my message is, kind of the work that I do in Empire Sport, is kind of turn that needs analysis process in on yourself. Because if more of us do that, exactly what you're saying, like we're working with each other in a completely different level, completely different space.
And for me, the magic happens when we provide a secure environment, and that's from make the coach feel secure. Do you know what? You're going to lose 4 games. That's okay, because we think you're the best coach we could get for what we want. Then that rolls down to the security within all the staff. And then you work on those things like developing the staff, developing themselves, whether it be a young 23, 4-year-old coach, or whether it might just start with the heads of department and how they interact with people within their department. And then it just becomes a kind of snowball effect of this kind of self-development. And you touched on it earlier, coaches need coaches, and these heads of performances, it's a great role, but they need to come off the grass, because they can't spend all morning on the grass and not really developing systems, because you don't develop people, you don't develop systems, because you're just putting on the show every day.
Yeah. Do you think, last question, so that change of giving the manager security, do you think that comes from the general, like the GM, the owner, club owner level?
Yeah, I think it. I think the problem is it comes from the club owner, but what we have is there's not just the financial implications, which are massive. There's also a lot of the peaks and troughs are a lot quicker than they used to be. So if Man City lose a game or Man U lose a game, they're rubbish. Ten Hag's crap. He needs to go, and then he wins 2 on the bounce. Yeah, see, we're going in the right direction. But they get that noise from TalkSport, Sky Sports, the fans outside, because some of those phone-ins then fuel maybe the opinions of some of the fans. So then the fans start being like, well, we can't have this guy. And that adds pressure on. And don't forget, these people are human. So if you've got 60,000 people saying, get this guy out, you're thinking, oh, do I not? And plus it, 200 million, it kind of puts them in a really difficult situation, because it's our thirst for knowledge, or not knowledge, information, that we just want to be bombarded with 24-hour sports, Talk Sport and Sky Sports and phone-ins and Twitter, that people put out more and more opinion, which is great, but then it kind of skews fans' opinion, which then becomes very vocal at the weekend. They got booed off at halftime, got booed off at, they've lost 1 game. Relax a little bit.
Right. And the key word you said there, like they're humans. I think we're all, that's the point. We're all humans doing a certain job in a certain environment. We're still humans. and
Yeah.
that's what you've highlighted, I think, really well today in the chat. And certainly what I see is that, with regard to the complication, the human dynamics, the complications of what, self-preservation, for example, the threat of challenge of someone coming to take my job, like there's such real human, genuine threats, understandably, but without awareness of that, of how we're getting drawn into that drama, we're just going to continue it. And, you said like that awareness of self or self-aware is a key non-technical skill to develop. And I've really, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think that's about it. I think I've bored people enough by now. So
Great. No, it's really good. I've really enjoyed it. And I think this is kind of my wish for this podcast, that untapped potential. And that's what I see as untapped potential, that people becoming more self-aware to unlock this very normal human stuff we carry with us. Each of us carry, no matter how good we look on the surface or on social media, like we've all got this stuff within us. And that's what I see as untapped potential. When we can unlock that and free ourselves from our own stuff, we work together better as a cohesive, collaborative collective.
And that's performance, right? Because we all know the X's and O's now, and
Right.
this is what I think I'm getting at. We all know the latest research on hamstrings or this or that, and it's like, but we don't see what the bigger piece is safety and self-awareness and how we interact with each other. Because for me, in my personal experience, I'm not saying, it's a hugely limiting factor within performance in elite sport, and someone at some point is going to crack it and see the potential in it.
Massively. And I think people are looking, like Cody Royal stands out to me, Craig White stands out to me, looking at the person. Performance is a thing, but there's so many things that underpin that. And you just said a really good thing at the end. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing kind of your knowledge. And I'm excited to see where your doctorate goes and your work goes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Where can people find you? Like, what are you doing work-wise at the moment?
So Twitter at Walshy2123, LinkedIn I'm posting probably more on. I'm not kind of I'm enjoying flicking through the new Twitter or whatever it's called, but I'm not understanding too much the changes. Work-wise, I'm just kind of back from Turkey at the end of last season and just seeing what the next opportunity holds. So let's see, fingers crossed.
Right, I'm excited to see, and I'll put all that below so people can reach out to you. And thank you so much. I've really appreciated, and thank you for coming on.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you for your time and energy in listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've taken something from it. If you have, please, can I point you in the direction of leaving a review or feedback on iTunes or Spotify? Your direct action is going to help more and more practitioners access this content. And if you do know of any practitioners that would benefit from this, then please send it around your social networks. It'll just help this message and grow amongst our community. So thank you again, and see you in the next episode.